What if the man you spent years chasing suddenly became the only person who could save you? How does someone go from hunting celebrities for a living to sleeping on the streets with no way back? Is it true that one mistake can ruin your entire life? Or is redemption possible if the right person sees you at your lowest? This is the story of a man who had it all: money, power, a career built on exposing Hollywood's biggest stars, until one reckless moment destroyed everything. He became invisible, forgotten, lost. But on a cold night in Los Angeles, when he thought he was nothing more than a shadow in the background, he saw the one person he never expected to see again: Keanu Reeves. And what happened next changed his life forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the right words from the right person can break you down, but also rebuild you into someone better. Before we dive into this powerful story, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from today. And if you love stories that challenge perspectives and reveal the power of second chances, hit that like button and subscribe. This is one story you won't forget. Los Angeles, the city where dreams are made or broken. Jack Flash Thompson had seen it all. He had once been at the top of his game, known by every major tabloid and gossip site. He wasn't just a paparazzo, he was a hunter. Celebrities feared him, publicists despised him, but editors loved him. Because Jack always got the shot, the exclusive, the scandal, the moment no one was supposed to see. But today, nobody looked at him. He sat on the sidewalk near Sunset Boulevard, unrecognizable from the man he used to be. His once expensive leather jacket was now a faded, torn mess. His hair, once slicked back with precision, was greasy and unkempt. His hands trembled from hunger and exhaustion. People passed him without a second glance, as if he were part of the city's background noise. He could hear their conversations, their plans, their complaints, their laughter. No one acknowledged the man who once made headlines himself. Jack had spent years chasing people, but now he was the one being avoided. He pulled his knees close to his chest, looking down at his scuffed shoes. He barely noticed when a car pulled up across the street. But then, something caught his attention. A man stepped out, tall, black suit, a familiar presence. Jack's breath hitched. He knew that face anywhere. Keanu Reeves. Jack didn't move. His body wanted to react, to jump up, to run, to grab a camera that no longer existed in his life. But he was frozen, because Keanu was the last person he ever wanted to see. Not after what happened. There was a time when Jack wasn't sitting on dirty pavement. There was a time when he walked into exclusive events like he owned the place. He had started as a nobody, just another camera guy lurking outside fancy restaurants, hoping for a lucky shot. But Jack had something that others didn't: a hunger for the perfect moment. He was willing to cross any line, step on any boundary, do whatever it took to get the shot. That hunger turned him into a legend. He had bribed hotel staff, paid informants, even disguised himself as a waiter at an Oscar after-party just to snap a picture of an A-list actor in a drunken stupor. He had chased celebrities down highways, knowing that the right photo could be worth tens of thousands. And he was damn good at it. Keanu Reeves had been one of his favorite targets. Not because Keanu was scandalous. In fact, the opposite. He was one of the few celebrities who never snapped, never fought back, never retaliated. Keanu was different. He didn't yell, didn't throw punches, didn't file lawsuits. That made him an easy mark. Jack followed him everywhere. From airports to coffee shops, he made a living off of Keanu's quiet existence. He knew Keanu's routine better than his own. And then, one night changed everything. It had started like any other chase. Jack had received a hot tip from an anonymous source. Keanu had been seen entering a private hospital late at night. Rumors spread fast. Was he sick? Was he secretly visiting someone? Was this a scandal? Jack didn't care about the answers. He just needed the shot. He jumped into his car, speeding toward the location. His camera sat in the passenger seat, ready to fire. And then, he saw him. Keanu's black SUV pulled out of the hospital parking lot. Jack hit the gas. This was his moment. He needed to get close, but the traffic was thick. His pulse pounded. If he lost Keanu now, he'd lose the paycheck of a lifetime. His foot pressed harder on the pedal. He weaved between cars, running red lights, ignoring honking horns. And then, a woman screamed. Jack barely registered it before he heard the screech of brakes. A pedestrian, a middle-aged woman, had stepped into the road, directly in Keanu's path. Keanu's SUV slammed to a stop just in time. Jack's car skidded behind him, nearly losing control. Keanu jumped out of the car immediately. His first reaction wasn't anger, wasn't shock. He rushed to the woman. Jack? Jack didn't even get out of his car. Instead, he lifted his camera. A celebrity in distress. A scandalous shot. A headline that would explode. His fingers snapped photo after photo, zooming in on Keanu kneeling beside the woman, checking if she was okay. That was all he needed. Jack drove off before anyone could question him. And the next morning, his photos were everywhere. The headlines, Keanu Reeves involved in late-night hospital scandal, secret visit or more? Reeves rushes to help woman after mysterious night at private clinic. Is Keanu Reeves hiding something? Jack cashed in big. But the victory didn't last long. What Jack hadn't counted on was the backlash. Keanu never spoke about the incident, but the internet did. The public turned against Jack in a way he had never seen before. People hated him. He didn't even stop to help. He only cared about the damn photo. Absolute scum. And then, the woman spoke out. She had been crossing the street to visit her sick husband at the hospital when she nearly got hit. Jack's reckless chase had endangered her life. The moment that should have made him a fortune turned into his worst nightmare. His agency cut him loose. Editors stopped taking his calls. He was sued for reckless endangerment. His reputation was shattered. Then came the final blow. His wife walked out. "You put a paycheck before a human life, Jack," she said, packing her bags. "And now you're surprised people don't want anything to do with you?" She took their daughter. Jack was left with nothing. His money ran dry. He gambled away what little he had left, thinking he could rebuild. But the hole only got deeper. Soon, he had no car, no apartment, no camera. And now, years later, he was here, on the sidewalk, watching the man he had chased for years walk past him without even noticing. Jack didn't know if it was hunger or something else clawing at his insides, but as he walked the streets of Los Angeles that night, something felt different. For months, he had wandered these same blocks, watching people rush past him like he was a stain on the sidewalk. Some days, he could still hear the clicks of cameras in his mind, the adrenaline of capturing a perfect shot. But that life was gone. His stomach twisted painfully. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, not properly anyway, just scraps from a trash bin behind a convenience store. The smell of grilled meat and warm bread floated through the air from a nearby diner, and he almost walked away before he saw something that stopped him cold. A black car pulled up to the curb, sleek and familiar. A man stepped out. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Keanu Reeves. Jack had spent years tracking him, memorizing his movements, but this time was different. He wasn't here to take anything from Keanu. He had nothing left to take. For the first time in his life, he hesitated. What was he even thinking? Approaching Keanu now? The man had every reason to hate him. Jack had chased him down like prey, treating him like a paycheck rather than a person. But now, Jack wasn't a predator. He was just a man with nothing left but regret. Still, desperation didn't leave room for pride. Jack stepped forward. He tried to move with confidence, but the years of hardship weighed on him. His clothes, tattered and stained, made him look no better than a ghost. He forced himself forward. Keanu was already inside, sitting at a table near the window. The warm glow of the diner lights framed him, making the contrast between their worlds even starker. Jack, standing out in the cold, and Keanu, sitting with a quiet peace Jack had never understood. Jack's pulse pounded. He knew he had to move before doubt stopped him. His legs carried him toward the entrance, but before he could step inside, a strong hand gripped his shoulder. Jack jerked back instinctively, raising his hands, but the grip tightened. Whoa, back up. A man in a black suit, one of Keanu's security guards, blocked the doorway. Another one flanked his side. Jack swallowed hard. I just need to talk to him, Jack said, his voice weaker than he wanted it to be. The guard didn't budge. Mr. Reeves isn't taking any visitors. I'm not a visitor, Jack muttered. His throat burned. He knows me. The guard gave him a slow, scrutinizing look. His gaze ran from Jack's disheveled hair to his sunken face, to the way his clothes barely fit him anymore. Jack already knew what they saw. A homeless guy looking for a handout. I don't think so, the guard said flatly. Move along. No, please, he blurted. He hadn't meant to sound so desperate, but it was all rushing out now. Just let me talk to him. Keanu, please. Just listen to me. Then, the diner fell silent. Jack barely noticed it, too caught up in the pounding of his own pulse. And then he heard it. A chair scraping back. A shadow moved in the doorway. The guards immediately stepped aside as Keanu Reeves himself appeared in the entrance. Jack felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Keanu looked at him, his face unreadable. For a long, agonizing second, Jack waited for the worst. He expected Keanu to tell him off, to have security drag him away, to remind him of all the times he had invaded his privacy without remorse. Instead, Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. Jack saw it, the flicker of memory, the gears turning as Keanu pieced together who he was looking at. Then Keanu tilted his head slightly. You used to chase me, he said, his voice even. Now you're running toward me. The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. His breath shuddered out of him. He tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. How do you even begin to apologize for a lifetime of mistakes? Jack opened his mouth, then closed it. Shame weighed down every word. Keanu watched him, waiting. His expression wasn't angry, just curious. Jack finally broke. The weight of the past collapsed on him all at once. His knees buckled slightly, but he caught himself against the doorframe. I'm sorry, Jack whispered. The words barely left his lips, but Keanu heard them. I'm sorry for everything, Jack said again, stronger this time. His voice cracked. For all the years of following you, for invading your life, for not stopping when I should have. His throat tightened. For the accident. I should have stopped. I should have. Jack's voice died. He felt exposed, raw in a way he hadn't been in years. Keanu was silent for a long time. Then, instead of anger, instead of condemnation, Keanu asked a question Jack never expected. Have you eaten today? Jack blinked. He thought he had misheard. His brain tried to make sense of the words, but they didn't fit with what he had been expecting. Keanu didn't ask why he was here. He didn't ask for excuses. He didn't even acknowledge Jack's apology. He just asked if he had eaten. Jack's mouth opened, then closed. Keanu took a step back into the diner and gestured for him to follow. Come on, he said simply. Let's eat. Jack stood frozen for a moment before his legs moved on their own. The guards didn't stop him this time. He followed Keanu inside, the warmth of the diner wrapping around him as if he had just stepped into another world. The smell of coffee and freshly cooked food hit him hard. His stomach twisted painfully in response. Keanu didn't make a big deal out of it. He just led Jack to a booth and sat down across from him. Picking up a menu like this was the most normal thing in the world. Jack sat down slowly. His hands twitched, unsure of what to do. A waitress appeared, barely glancing at him before focusing on Keanu. Your usual? Keanu nodded. And whatever he wants. She turned to Jack expectantly. Jack hadn't ordered food in a restaurant in years. He had begged for scraps, dug through trash, eaten whatever people left behind. But sitting at a table and ordering? That was a luxury long forgotten. He didn't even know what to ask for. His throat felt tight again. Just whatever's cheap, he muttered. Keanu raised an eyebrow at him. Get something real. Jack hesitated. Keanu didn't press. He just gave a small nod, as if saying, it's okay. Just order. Jack swallowed and muttered, burger and fries. The waitress nodded and walked away. Then, for the first time, Jack really looked at Keanu, the man he had once chased without remorse, the man whose privacy he had spent years violating, the man he had every reason to hate him. And yet, here they were, sitting at a table, eating together. Jack still didn't understand why, but for the first time in years, He felt something in his chest that wasn't regret. He felt human, and that scared him more than anything. Jack chewed slowly, barely tasting the food. The warmth of the burger and the crispness of the fries should have been comforting, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Across from him, Keanu ate in silence, his expression calm. It felt unnatural to Jack. There was no anger, no resentment, no judgment in Keanu's gaze, just an unreadable quiet. Jack didn't know what to say. How do you talk to someone you've spent years chasing? Someone whose privacy you treated like a prize? The silence stretched. Jack found himself studying Keanu. The way he carried himself, the way he seemed at peace despite everything. It was a stark contrast to Jack's own existence, chaotic, desperate, always on edge. Finally, Keanu spoke. You spent your whole life chasing people. His voice was steady, unhurried. What happens when you start chasing something else? Jack blinked. The question didn't make sense. He wasn't chasing anything anymore. He had nothing left to chase. I don't know what that means, Jack admitted. His voice felt smaller than he wanted it to. Keanu leaned back, eyes scanning Jack like he was trying to figure out where to begin. Chasing fame, money, power, Keanu continued. It feels like it gives you purpose. Until it doesn't. Jack felt something in his stomach tighten. He had told himself the same thing before, but hearing it out loud made it real. Keanu set his drink down. You know, I've lost a lot of people in my life. Jack tensed. He had heard the rumors, the stories, but he had never thought about Keanu's pain as anything more than a headline. My best friend, my sister, my wife, my child, Keanu exhaled, shaking his head slightly. When you lose that much, the world stops making sense for a while. But pain, it's not the end of the story, Jack. He looked him in the eye. It's just part of it. The question is, what do you do with it? Jack didn't have an answer. For years, he had used his pain as an excuse, a reason to drown himself in work, in alcohol, in distractions. But sitting here, across from the man he had wronged, he realized he had never actually faced it. Keanu picked up a napkin, pulled a pen from his pocket, and wrote something down. He slid it across the table. Jack hesitated before picking it up. A name, a number, a business card. Jack turned the card over between his fingers. The logo wasn't familiar. It wasn't a media outlet, not a tabloid. What is this? He asked. Keanu took another sip of his drink before answering. A photography organization, he said. They don't do celebrity shots. They capture real stories. People that no one pays attention to. Jack frowned. And why would they hire me? Keanu's eyes held a quiet certainty. Because you know how to see things that others don't. Jack almost laughed. He had spent his life exploiting people's worst moments. That wasn't a skill. It was a curse. I'm not a storyteller, Jack muttered. Keanu shook his head. You've been telling stories your whole life, Jack. You just told the wrong ones. Jack swallowed. He wanted to believe him, but how could he? He had burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship. Keanu leaned forward. You have a choice. His voice was quiet but firm. You can keep running, or you can start over. Jack stared at the card. It felt too simple. No one handed second chances like this, especially not to people like him. But Keanu wasn't like most people. Jack shoved the card into his pocket and stood up. His hands clenched into fists, not from anger but from fear. I don't know if I can do this, Jack admitted. I don't know if I'm even capable of, he trailed off, shaking his head. Keanu didn't press. He just said, you won't know unless you try. Jack showed up the next day, not because he believed in himself, but because he had nothing left to lose. The office was smaller than he expected. It wasn't some sleek newsroom or a high-rise magazine headquarters. It was a converted space in a quiet part of the city, filled with photos, not of celebrities, but of people, real people. Jack hesitated at the door. It felt like he didn't belong here. Then, a woman approached him. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed but kind. You must be Jack, she said, extending a hand. Keanu told me you'd be stopping by. Jack stiffened. He hadn't even decided if he was staying yet, and Keanu had already set this up, but there was no pity in her eyes. No judgment. just an expectation. And for some reason, Jack didn't want to let her down. The first few days were hell. Jack wasn't used to this kind of work. He had spent years waiting in bushes, snapping intrusive photos from a distance. Now, he was told to talk to people, to learn their stories before capturing them. It was exhausting. He had never cared about the people behind his camera before. Now, he had to. Jack almost walked out more times than he could count. Then, everything changed. It was a rainy afternoon. Jack was asked to cover a local charity event. Nothing glamorous, just people helping others. He had his camera, standing in the background, watching. And then he saw her. A woman in her late 30s, standing under a small shelter with a young boy clutching her side. Something about them felt familiar. Jack lifted his camera instinctively, but this time, he didn't just take the photo. He walked up to them. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain. "Do you mind if I take your picture?" The woman looked at him, hesitant, then down at her son. Jack expected her to wave him off like every celebrity had. Instead, she said, "Why?" Jack didn't have an answer. For years, the answer had been simple, because it would sell, because it would make money. But now, he just wanted people to see them. "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but I think people should." She nodded slowly. Jack raised the camera, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a thief. The photo went up on the organization's website. It wasn't a viral scandal. It wasn't front-page news. But a man saw it. A man who had been searching for his sister and nephew for years. Within a week, the woman was reunited with her brother, a man who had thought he lost her forever. Jack saw it happen. He saw their hug, their tears, their joy, and something inside him shifted. This was what Keanu meant. He had spent his life capturing pain. Now, he was capturing something real. And for the first time in years, Jack felt like he was chasing the right thing. Jack stood on the balcony of his small apartment, camera slung around his neck, watching the sun dip below the Los Angeles skyline. The city that had once swallowed him whole now felt different. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It wasn't a place where he lurked in shadows, waiting to snap a photo that could ruin someone's life. Months had passed since he first stepped into that photography organization. At first, the work felt foreign. The assignments weren't about catching celebrities off guard or uncovering scandals. Instead, Jack had been sent into places he once ignored: homeless shelters, veteran assistance programs, refugee communities. He met people who had been forgotten by society, people whose stories no one wanted to tell because they weren't glamorous enough for headlines. And the strangest thing? Jack felt something he hadn't in years. For the first time, his camera wasn't a weapon. It was a way to give people a voice. He had documented a veteran struggling to find housing, a single mother working 3 jobs to keep her children fed, an artist who lost everything but still painted murals on abandoned buildings, refusing to let the world forget him. And every time Jack clicked the shutter, it wasn't for a paycheck. It was for them. Jack hadn't thought much about Keanu since that night at the diner. He carried Keanu's words with him, but he never expected to see him again. That changed one afternoon when Jack received an assignment. A well-known non-profit organization was hosting a charity gala, raising money for displaced families. Jack was asked to cover the event, not as a paparazzo, but as a documentary photographer capturing the night's real moments. Jack accepted without hesitation. The evening was filled with powerful conversations. Wealthy donors mingled with community leaders. Jack focused on the silent moments that told the real story. A young girl tugging on her mother's dress as they thanked a benefactor. An elderly man shaking hands with the person who had funded his medical care. Jack was reviewing his shots when he felt it. A presence. The air shifted in a way that was oddly familiar. A quiet gravity pulling him toward a figure standing near the stage. Jack looked up, and his heart nearly stopped. Keanu Reeves. Jack instinctively tensed, his old instincts flaring. For years, his reflex at seeing Keanu had been to grab his camera, to take the shot before he could disappear. But this time, Jack didn't move. He watched as Keanu engaged in quiet conversation with an event organizer. His expression was the same, humble, sincere, unaffected by the attention he naturally commanded. Jack exhaled slowly, gripping his camera strap. This wasn't a chase anymore. This wasn't about him. Jack turned back to his camera, ready to move on. But then Keanu glanced in his direction. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, Jack considered looking away. But Keanu's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. He nodded slightly, taking a step closer. Jack braced himself. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Keanu said. Jack let out a breath. "Me neither." Keanu glanced at the camera in Jack's hands. "Still behind the lens, I see." Jack shrugged. "Still chasing stories. Just different ones now." Keanu studied him for a moment. Then, with a quiet amusement, he said, "Told you you could chase something better." Jack's throat tightened. For a long time, he had questioned whether he could ever really change, whether the damage he had done could be undone. But in this moment, he realized it wasn't about undoing the past. It was about choosing the future. Jack didn't think much of the interaction after that. But the next morning, as he scrolled through his phone, something made him freeze. A news article. From Paparazzi to Storyteller. How one man's journey redefined photography. His name was in the headline. Jack's chest tightened as he clicked the link. A journalist at the event had overheard his conversation with Keanu. The article chronicled his fall from grace, his time on the streets, and the moment Keanu Reeves had offered him a second chance. Jack's transformation was out in the open now, and people were talking about it. Comments flooded the article. "This is the kind of story we need to hear more about. Proof that people can change. Keanu Reeves is a real one." But Jack took the steps himself. Respect. Jack set his phone down, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, his name wasn't attached to a scandal. It was attached to something real. And somehow, that felt more valuable than any photograph he had ever taken. Jack sat on the steps of a quiet park, camera resting on his lap, watching the world move around him. There was a time when he would have seen these people differently, as potential headlines, as opportunities for profit. Now, he saw them for who they were. A father tossing his daughter into the air, her laughter echoing in the evening air. An elderly couple walking hand in hand, their pace slow but steady. A group of musicians playing for no one in particular, just for the love of the sound. Life, in all its raw, unfiltered moments. Jack lifted his camera, snapping a photo of a young boy feeding pigeons, his face full of wonder. It wasn't for a paycheck. It wasn't for clicks. It was because it mattered. Keanu's words lingered in his mind. "Pain isn't the end of your story, Jack. It's part of it. The question is, what do you do with it?" Jack finally had his answer. He had spent years chasing ghosts, believing that the only way to survive was to run after things that didn't truly matter. But the truth was, the real stories were never in the scandals or the stolen moments. They were in the people. He thought back to the moment he had last seen Keanu, how effortlessly the actor had reminded him that change was possible. Not through grand gestures, but through choices. And Jack had chosen differently. He wasn't the man who once trailed celebrities for sport, who justified invading lives for profit. That man was gone. In his place was someone else, someone who still held a camera, but now he captured something real. He looked down at the latest picture he had taken, the boy with the pigeons, completely unaware of the lens capturing him. A real moment. A human story. Jack took a breath and stood up, walking into the city, not chasing anything anymore.